good morning, good afternoon, good evening, the participants or participants. I hope all of you and your family and your colleagues or friends are well and also good health. So today is the second day of the workshop. So yesterday we had a lecture on climate finance from various institutions like JICA or JCM, etc. And then today is the day focused on the GCF, Green Climate Fund. So I'd like to hand over the baton to the Brad-san for the following session. Thank you for your time. So Brad-san, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kobayashi-san. And a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who is here with us today on this second day. I hope that you're in good mood and ready for an exciting session. As Kobayashi-san said, this session is going to focus on GCF-related work and on provision of some practical guidance how to develop a good funding proposal and a good concept note. So today we're going to cover three topics, and you're going to have three speakers. So the first speaker is going to be Ayaka, and she's from the division of the private sector facility, and she will talk about the GCF investment criteria and what exactly we are, and also the sector guides and what exactly we are looking into when we are selecting projects. And after that, there'll be a lecture by Kevin Hosberg, who is the lead, the climate science lead of the GCF, and he'll talk to us about a very interesting topic, which is the climate rationale, something that all of you are always interested to learn more about, and which is a key element of any GCF funding proposal. After that, I'll take the floor again, and I'll talk a little bit more about result management in the context of the GCF, especially about theories of change and logical framework. And then we're going to finish the session today with a very quick overview of the concept note development. So this is going to be the schedule today. Now, before I move forward and give the floor back to Ayaka, I just wanted to remind everybody that the session today is actually the first step of an exercise that we want all of you to go through, because this lecture is going to be the basis or the support that we want to provide you in order to develop concept notes for the GCF. So please use this information in order to improve the ideas that you have at the moment. And before the 18th of March, you'll be given time to work on your draft concept notes based on what you're going to learn here today. And then on March 18th, we are going to have a presentation. You're going to make a presentation of the draft concepts. And between today and March 18th, the GCF will be available, of course, to provide you with consultations while you're working on your concept notes and help you improve that. And we'll communicate later with you how exactly you can get in contact with us. So with that information in mind, I want to start the session today, but also maybe just do a very quick round of introduction of the speakers today. So first, I want to introduce Ayaka, and after that, Kevin. So Ayaka, just a few words about yourself.
Thank you, Vlad. Thank you so much. My name is Ayaka, Climate Investment Specialist from the Private Sector Facility. I've been here with GCF for just over 3 years now. Thank you. Back to you, Vlad.
Thank you, Ayaka. And over to you, Kevin.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin. I'm the lead climate scientist at the GCF. I've been with the GCF for a year now, but before that, I was a research oceanographer for over 20 years, and I've worked very closely with SIDS around some of the existential threats of sea level rise, as well as working with the WMO installing multi-hazard warning systems. So I'm really pleased to be doing this, this interaction today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kevin. So without any further ado, I would like to move forward to the first presentation and give the floor to Ayaka. Ayaka, please.
Thank you, Vlad. Okay, I did prepare a presentation, and hello everyone. Pleasure to be in the day 2. This is going to be an interactive session with me presenting for the first 30 minutes, and I believe there's going to be 20 minutes of Q&A. Kunihiko-san, are you guys ready to share the presentation material? Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so here, on this part, like Vlad-san said, I'm going to be covering mainly our priorities in terms of the investment, such as investment criteria, as well as the sectoral guidelines, followed by some of the examples and track records that we already have in our portfolio. I also wanted to touch upon some of the priorities that we have from the private sector strategy. All right, next slide, please. So I've gotten our examples from some of the 39 projects that we've already funded, which constitutes our portfolio size of 3.4 billion. Next slide, please. All right, so here, so I'd like to emphasize that the private sector strategy is not yet published in GCF. That's something that's going to the board at the end of this month. But this has been in the draft stage for over 1 year now. And we do note that last year, so we have an annual conference, which is GCF Private Investment for Climate Conference, called GPIC. And the agenda for GPIC last year was based on the draft private sector strategy at that time. So I thought it would be interesting to go through it, just so you have a sneak peek on, or some idea on what the private sector strategy will look like. So here I've highlighted some of the keywords. So here we're in GCF, we're trying to promote a conducive investment environment so that private sector investors are more comfortable coming into the climate projects where they have less track record. We are also promoting climate technologies, the innovative ones that are going to have some paradigm shifting effects. We also support, and this is something that's not exactly new, but gaining more traction here, is the innovative adaptation technologies, as well as ecosystem-based approaches and services. For the first 5 years of our operations, since 2015, since our first project got approved, GCF has heavily, at least in the private sector, invested in renewable energy. So we're pretty heavy on that front, and as we know, renewable energy is mitigation. We're becoming more aware that we need to invest more in adaptation technologies, as well as ecosystem-based approaches and services, because that's the area that is not yet touched by private sector because of several barriers, including the lack of track record and so on. We also note, so our goal is unlocking markets to crowd in private finance, and we keep doing that. We also would like to strengthen domestic financial systems and institutions in our local countries, because that's where the climate investment needs to continue even after we exit from projects. And last but not least, we have LDCs and SIDS. So these are going to be our increasing priority in the coming years as we expand further in our portfolio, because we do note that a lot of investments are needed in SIDS and LDCs where the hit from the climate adversity is the highest. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so you may be familiar with this slide on what we look for from yesterday. Today, I'd like to focus on particularly 2 areas, which are the 6 investment criteria, as well as the 8 result areas, just so we can learn more about what exactly we mean by that, and so you know exactly what we're looking for. So moving on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the allocation of the 6 criteria. Firstly, we have the impact potential. So this is essentially the potential for project to contribute to the achievement of GCF's objectives and result areas. And there are 2 types of indicators. Mitigation impact indicator, which is like project lifetime emission reductions, as well as adaptation impact indicators, refer to the number of direct and indirect beneficiaries. And to do that, climate impact is very much key, and the evidence must be provided. The second one is the paradigm shift potential. This is the degree to which GCF can achieve sustainable development impact beyond one-off project investment. We need the project to have the impact that will last beyond that project on its own. So that's why we always look at the replicability of the project and the scalability in that particular region or similar landscapes. Thirdly is the sustainable development potential. And the kind of questions that we're asking over here is, does the project have wider benefit and priorities? Are environment and social safeguard an integral part of the project, or as well as gender equality an integral part of the project? In addition to the impacts of the project, the proposals need to identify positive co-benefits in the area of economic co-benefits, social co-benefits, environmental co-benefits, as well as gender empowerment co-benefits. Fourthly is the recipient needs. So here we are referring to vulnerability and financial needs of the beneficiary country and population. So the kind of questions we're asking here is, does the project provide financing needs to the beneficiary country and population? Or is there an absence of alternative sources of financing? So the project proposals should describe the country's financial, economic, or social or private sector institutional needs, and barriers to accessing private sources of climate-related finance. Fifthly is the country ownership. So this is a very important aspect of every GCF project. We require the country, so the recipient country, to be fully on board in every single project that we do, which is the reason why we need them to submit a no-objection letter every time. So the project has to clearly describe how the proposed activities align with the country's nationally determined contributions and other relevant national plans, if any. So, and also how the funding proposal will help achieve those nationally determined contributions or the plans by making progress against targets defined in national climate policies and strategies. And these strategies can be nationally appropriate mitigation actions or national adaptation plans. For the efficiency and effectiveness, we check if something is economic and if appropriate, if financial soundness is there in the project. We ask questions like, does the project foster cost effectiveness and private sector funding mobilization? Is the cost per ton of the carbon dioxide equivalent? What's the ratio of co-financing, and what's the expected rate of return? Okay, that's it for the 6 investment criteria and the result areas. So we have the 8 result areas over here. If you can click one more, you will see. Excellent, thank you. So we have 8 result areas over here. And the first circle, green circle, is the mitigation areas, and the blue circles are the adaptation ones. And I'm not going to, so I wanted to highlight some of the projects that we've done and highlight some of the key messages from the sectoral guideline for some of this. So I'm going to go into the details of agriculture, energy, ecosystem, and Yeah, those are the ones we're gonna go into. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in GCF, we have published a sectoral guideline, which is available to you. That's a very useful guideline, in fact, because it describes what exactly it is that we're trying to achieve in each of these 8 result areas that we have mentioned earlier. And it also demonstrates how we plan to contribute in terms of catalyzing catalyzing innovation or mobilizing private finances. So if you have further questions after this presentation, I highly recommend going into the sectoral guidelines, and I can post the link as well. So going into the agriculture and food security, it's really, we are putting higher priority on climate resilience and low emission practices in the agriculture and food security sector. And the pathway to achieving that includes promoting resilient agroecology, where the project site is planting improved climate resilient plant varieties, promoting innovative adaptation technologies, diversifying the crops, as well as improving land. And of course, water management is also key to agriculture. You would also like to facilitate climate-informed advisory and risk management services by updating farmers about daily weather, future climate risks, how to face them, and what kind of risk management services are available out there. We aim to reconfigure food systems. What we mean by that is multiple intervention while products are delivered from farmers to consumers. So here we're referring to energy efficient fertilizer, for example, as well as use of technologies, energy sources, and infrastructure on farms that reduce emissions so that the farms become more resilient to the climate threats. We are aware that there is limited investments in place for innovative technologies or innovative practices in agricultural development. So GCF is fully supporting this. And I wanted to go to the next slide to walk you through one of our examples where we've done supported agricultural resilience, climate resilience. So here in Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund, we invested 23 million in equity and 3 million in grant for technical assistance. We were the anchor investor, and the fund is going to make small investments, or have already started making small investment of between $1 to $3 million in agricultural enterprises in East and West Africa. And the fund's aim is to support pioneering and early growth agribusinesses that enhance the climate resilience of smallholder farmers. It invests in platform businesses, which improve smallholder farmers' access to the market. They provide digital solutions that enhance supply chain visibility and efficiency, as well as financial services such as innovative payment or credit and insurance solutions to farmers at scale. An initial technical assistance grant of $3 million from us was accompanied by 23 million junior equity, and it was matched by other senior equity stakes from private investors, as well as some public concessional investors. It has now invested in solar irrigation, climate services, as well as contract farming schemes with strong forward linkages to food processing. And investments have also been made in dairy farming through irrigation, range of foods and services. The really important message over here is that it was the first of its kind in terms of adaptation-focused agriculture fund, and has delivered benefits to over 10 million beneficiaries. And I think it was a really good example of GCF de-risking and crowding in private investment through our junior position in the fund structure. Moving on to the next slide, I want to highlight some of the key messages from the forest and land use. So as loss of forest continues, we lose the carbon sinks, and the GCF fully supports projects in the forest and land use sector, which would firstly protect natural forests and landscapes. Because we would like to maintain natural forest cover and associate ecosystems, it's much easier to protect something that's already there rather than rebuilding something that is already lost. So protecting is something that we put a big emphasis on. Secondly, sustainable management of productive forest landscapes. So we aim to sustainably manage productive forest land to support people and the environment, as well as value chains of key commodities. Sorry, I skipped one. So that's the restoring degraded forest and other landscapes. So this is in the aim of remedying post-harmful actions towards restoring healthy and resilient ecosystems. What we mean by that is we are trying to restore degraded land and restoring deforested areas. The problem that we have in forest and land use is the low return in natural forest, as well as high perceived risk related to unclear legislation and governance. So here we see the opportunity for GCF to come support project as first loss provider to mobilize international and private and public investors, and hopefully through that build track record to the extent that private sector investors would feel more comfortable coming in. Next slide is the example of our track record. Thank you. So this is the example called Arbaro Sustainable Forestry Fund. The accredited entity was MUFG Bank. So this is where we have invested 25 million of equity to the second close of a private equity fund that focused exclusively on building forest or planting timbers, as well as conserving natural forest. So this was one of the rare projects where in these regions where we saw the FSC, the Forestry Stewardship Council certified plantation forestry project. A lot of the countries that are targeted over here has very low ratio of FSC certified forest or project. So we saw the meaning of a paradigm shift coming into there to really put in the emphasis of the best practices in the sector. Thank you. And the next slide, please. Next, I want to highlight some of the key elements of the energy generation and access area. So low emission and energy generation. We aim to generate electricity from renewable sources such as wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, sustainable bioenergy, as well as wave energy. And as well as efficient and reliable energy transmission, distribution, and storage. So here we aim to invest in grid flexibility, digitalization, and storage, because these improvements in efficiency increase the capacity of grids so that it can operate more efficiently with a higher proportion of renewable energy. Thirdly, we aim to promote access to clean energy, and what we mean by that is the off-grid, mini-grid energy generation from renewable sources. So we are aware that often the renewable energy financiers and developers become more hesitant to invest into these projects because of the uncertainties of long-term planning. The power market regulations can also get in the way because oftentimes they're not fully in place at the time of the investment. We are also aware of the limitations in the capacity of national power grids to integrate renewable energy. So through its anchor investment, GCF, we work to address these barriers. And when we invest, we not only mobilize private sector financing, but we also work on policy and regulatory reforms as well through our technical assistance, even in private sector projects. Moving on to the next slide is the Climate Investor one of our project examples from the renewable energy. So this was the where we invested 100 million into an innovative blended equity fund, which offered full end-to-end project life cycle for renewable energy projects. What we really liked about this fund is that it offered us opportunities to invest in early stage ideas. So essentially, you could invest from the development phase all the way until construction phase. And once it is operational, we are going to be we are going to exit the fund because there is going to be a refinancing fund where more risk-averse investors are waiting for us to exit so that they can take over the ownership of the investee companies. We thought that was an innovative way to crowd in private sector financing, because essentially not only we are crowding in investments at the development phase and construction phase, but also we're crowding in private investors with different levels of risk averseness by having that refinancing options, refinancing fund in place. Okay, moving on to the next slide. This is going to be the last highlights that I will talk about from the sectoral guidelines. So it's the ecosystems and ecosystem services, which is also becoming another one of our priorities in GCF. So we will be putting more emphasis on ecosystem-based management of terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems, which refers to the landscape level protection and restoration to maintain the ability to restore and sequester carbon. We also have the ecosystem-based management of coastal and marine ecosystems, where we aim to integrate protections, restoration, and management of coastal and marine ecosystem into mitigation planning, adaptation planning, disaster risk reduction, as well as infrastructure development. Like many other areas of climate investment, there aren't a lot of track record at least from the private sector in this field. So that's also something that we're working on. But luckily, if you go to the next slide, you will see one of our examples for which we're very much proud of, because this was not only ecosystems, it had other wastewater management as well. But we thought this was a good example of where we managed to mobilize private sector financing for ecosystem projects. So this is called the Global Fund for Coral Reefs Investment, which was approved last year. Here, GCF is providing a catalytic equity to mobilize private finance at scale to reverse the degradation of reef ecosystems, prevent the tipping point for coral reefs worldwide. So $150 million of junior equities, GCF's junior equity, is supposed to unlock and de-risk private investment, create a $500 million fund to enhance the adaptive capacity of coral reefs ecosystems and the communities that depend on them. Coral reefs, they provide an important ecosystem for marine life. They protect coastal areas, reduce the wave energy, erosion and storm damage. They also provide food security and livelihood for more than 1 billion people worldwide through the economic activities that they generate. So this investment essentially will enable the financing of between 20 to 30 companies and projects, as well as platforms across the target sectors, which is firstly sustainable ocean production, to address overfishing, destructive fishing techniques, and so on. So it was this is expected to benefit 3 million households and 3 million indirect beneficiaries as well. Okay, that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Ayaka, for this extremely interesting presentation. Although I work in the GCF when we always work directly, I'm always impressed when you introduce this kind of examples, and I think that there were also this was also a very good overview of the work that the fund does in different result areas. So thank you very much for this. And I can see that we already have two questions that have been posted in the chat from Setaita from the Fijian Development Bank. And maybe I want to invite actually Setaita to also read out the questions. I would like to invite also the other participants either to raise their hands using the raise hand function below, or just type their questions in the chat, or even their name, so that we can give the floor to them. So Setaita, would you like to ask Ayaka your question directly?
Yes, Bunga Vinaka everybody, this is Setaita from Fiji. Trust that everyone's well. Yeah, I'm actually just asking a question around the Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund. I just wanted to know if possible, if you can just explain the flow of equity fund from GCF, and secondly, just to explain the term of the equity funding from GCF, and thirdly, when does the GCF cease to be a shareholder in the company that is being created? So the similar question is around the agro investing in sustainable forestry projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Setaita. A great question indeed. Maybe if we can go back to the previous slide, slide 8, where we talked about Acumen Climate Resilient Fund. That may be a good idea. Yes, that one. Thank you so much. So, Setaita, your first question is the flow of equity from the GCF. So, as with other projects, whenever we invest in a project, all of our capital is flowing from our accredited entities. So, in this case, Acumen Fund was the accredited entity. So, our money, 23 million of junior equity, and 3 million of grant went from us through Acumen into the Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund. And there, the money got mixed with other private investors and concessional finance providers' money. But there's a different waterfall because we are the junior equity provider. The private sector financiers came in as it's a normal equity provider, so that we're taking a subordinated position against them. And secondly, you were asking to the term of equity funding from GCF. So here, our aim over here was really to mobilize the private sector financiers who were interested in principle to the idea, but were a little bit hesitant to invest because of the fact that they didn't have enough track record in the region. Like the kind of services that Araf provides is a credit-based systems that allows farmers to make money in the ecosystem and then use that money in order to buy the adaptation services, for example. And that kind of business model was pretty new. So the term that what we thought was important when we negotiated for the term is that we take a junior enough position so as to enable the private sector investors to feel comfortable enough to participate in this. So the term is junior, then what we mean by that is we will get always a subordinated position in the waterfall, meaning only after private sector investors are paid the return, we will get our turn to be repaid for our paid for our return. Not repaid because it's not a loan, it was a junior equity. Your third question was, when does GCF cease stop being a shareholder? So whenever the investee project manages to, so we stop being an investor essentially when Acumen, a resilient agriculture fund, stops being the investor of that investee company, and that is usually when the company has grown enough to find the option for refinancing, and after it's been passed over to the to another institution, hopefully private, because that is our aim, to have private sector companies have more exposures in these kind of companies. That's when we exit. So we exit along with Acumen. Okay, so that's the good exit, but we also take in consideration the current status of investment. So whenever we feel we see that our safeguards or our climate eligibility criteria are not being followed in the investment, then the project would have to go back to the board and may face the situation where we have to stop the disbursement for future capital and cease the investment. So there are two such scenarios. Does that answer your question, Setaita?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ayaka. And I believe also there was a second question on the Arboro project, but I believe that the structure there is relatively similar. Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Ayaka, and thank you again, Setaita, for your question. Let me see if there are any more questions from the audience. I don't see any hands, and I don't see any questions in the chat. So maybe, well, the rest of the participants are thinking about questions. Let me ask one question to you, Ayaka. So you're working in project origination, and you're actively working with accredited entities from across the world, including from SIDS. So from your experience up to now, what would you say that are the major challenges you would face with projects that are coming from SIDS? And also, what kind of advice can you provide to direct access entities and also to NDAs from SIDS countries?
Thank you. Thanks, Vlad. That's an excellent question. In fact, we have seen this coming year, in the past year, we've seen some more projects coming in from SIDS, and I'd be happy to share my findings from that. I think one challenge that we face in private sector facility for SIDS project is that is the non-existence of private sector in the SIDS countries on its own. So oftentimes we need to crowd in the private financiers internationally, and so that's one of the challenges that there is. So we hold with our accredited entities, we've had calls with private institutions to seek funding and sought interest as well. And the other challenge that we have is the accredited entity, because if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the direct access entities in SIDS are not accredited for private sector financial instruments. And by that, I mean loans and equity. It's a challenge to operate private sector projects when the options are limited to grants and guarantees. So that's where we are in conversation with several accredited entities to so that they can increase the scope of the accreditation. But that's another challenge we have. Maybe I can talk about one of the examples that we are looking at right now, we have recently started looking at a typhoon resilient wind energy idea in SIDS. Well, actually, we have been looking at that idea for over the past 3 years, but it only recently materialized. They were looking for the accredited entity across the SIDS for a very long time, and private sector as well, but they weren't exactly successful because of firstly, private sector institutions don't have a lot of exposures in SIDS. So it is sometimes beyond their risk capacity to invest in SIDS, even through even doing the admin work for GCF is often a challenge for them. So we overcame that by engaging one of our multilateral, so government organizations. It's a private sector, it's going to be a private sector project, but it will be most likely be submitted from a government organization. And I think that was a good combination of, because the government institutions are more likely to look at SIDS and they don't have any limitations on the risk capacity. So that was one of the hopefully successful examples.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ayaka, for this very detailed answer. And I hope it is also helpful to the participants. I'm still looking at the chat box. I don't see any questions here, but let me ask you one more question on my side, because I'm getting like more and more excited as I listen to you. So if a direct access entity from the SIDS, for example, wants to consult with you on a particular project idea that they have, can they approach PSF directly? Can they approach the Secretariat directly? What kind of support can you provide for them to better formulate the idea that they have? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Vlad. That's very important. So we are in private sector facility, we are responsible for the origination. So we engage with our project ideas pretty early on in the life of the project. So please, if you have any ideas that you have found that you believe is workable from the private sector facilities perspective, we would be more than happy to review that. Now, if it's a grant only idea, so I often receive SIDS private sector ideas that only has grant and guarantee. That may not be a workable one for PSF because of the limitations of the financial instrument that we have over here. Whenever we invest in something, it has to have the main financial instrument of loan or equity. But if that is cleared from your side, then please feel free to reach out to me. Often, so and that's at the project idea stage. So it can be, and it can happen either from accredited entity or project sponsor. If it's something that you've done, an accredited entity has already done the due diligence for, that's better. Usually that's the that's our requirement, because after all, we are the second due diligence provider. So we usually expect the accredited entity to be very, very comfortable with the idea, so that if we believe that in the climate rationale and the commercial viability of it, the accredited entity who submitted the idea would be ready to engage formally as accredited entity. I hope that is an answer. But
Thank you, Ayaka. And maybe just to clarify that even if there is a project that is pure grant project, well, of course, we as a secretariat will look at those projects as a GCF, but it will be the Division of Mitigation and Adaptation that most probably is going to handle those projects. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Ayaka. And I see one last question from Setitis, and then we can move to our planned break. So, Setaita, would you like to unmute yourself again and ask the question? And thank you again for posting it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's around the economy. So given COVID-19, there's higher liquidity in the economy that makes it cheaper for us to borrow locally and then on lend downscale to private sectors, for example. Now, how can GCF still make it attractive for AEs like FDB, for example, to borrow from GCF and on lend to private sector? Thanks.
Absolutely, Setaita, a very interesting question. And indeed, we face this in our projects, especially that includes local financing. I think the idea that we have is that if there is enough liquidity in the economies, and if it's very cheap to borrow locally, but despite that, if some climate projects are not being financed by local financiers, something is missing in the context. Something, either it can be either a regulatory framework, or it can be the guarantee that is required that even when a rate is very low from the banks, they need certain reassurance from external concessional finance or a patient capital provider. So from our side, our limit is essentially, well, we can go as low as required to make private sector financier more comfortable, depending on that context. There is no decided limit on how low or high our interest rate should be in a particular project. It is quite flexible depending on each project. So I think there is a lot of discussion that may be needed if we go into that, and but we always we're happy to have those discussions with local financiers, and usually we are luckily able to come up with solutions. So I'm confident that we can play a role in that as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ayaka, and thank you, Setaita, for this very interesting question. So I'm looking at the clock, and I think it's time for our first planned break for today. So I want to thank Ayaka once again for this excellent presentation and for the discussion that we had. So thank you, Ayaka, and let's break now for 10 minutes, and we'll come back again to listen to the second presentation today, which will be by Kevin on issues related to climate rationale. So once again, thank you everybody for participating in this first session, and see you in 10 minutes. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Happy to see you again, and I hope that you had a good break. So it's 1 o'clock now here in Songdo, so I would like to move to the second presentation for today's session. And that presentation is going to be on climate rationale, a topic that is of very high concern for the GCF, because all GCF projects actually have to be climate change projects. And our climate science lead, Kevin Osberg, is going to deliver that presentation. So without any further ado, I want to give the virtual floor to Kevin to get us through his presentation. Kevin?
Thank you very much, Vlad, and good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So first of all, I'm going to try and share my screen. Vlad, if you could just tell me when this is successful.
Sure. Okay. Yes, we can see your screen, Kevin.
Okay. So I'm going to be speaking about climate rationale, which, as Vlad says, is very important. Let me just make sure that the slides are going to advance properly. Here we go. And this is the outline that we'll follow. So we'll start by I'm not going to dive straight into climate rationale, because I think if we dive straight into a terminology which requires definition and explanation, then that would actually distract from some of the very positive messages that I want to get across during this talk, which is the work that's underway at the GCF to provide guidance, to provide technical support for the whole community, particularly for proposal developers, and to make sure that our review procedures and those of the independent advisory panel are consistent and fair. And I want to talk about some of the resources that I'm developing this year to support proposal development, and then we'll get to climate rationale and what it means, and how we can both test for it and also ensure that it's present. And I'm going to focus on the necessary data as well, which I know is a source of some great concern. And then at the end, I'd be very happy to take as many questions as possible, both during this session and offline. So I'd like to start with the resources that we're actually developing. And at the moment, we're working, myself and Vlad is helping me in this endeavour, to provide a whole range of resources in what we're calling the Climate Information Gateway. You can see in the box on the right there. This will be an internet-based resource hosted at GCF, but also connecting to other climate finance advisors, so that we can all agree on what is the right material that everyone will, from time to time, need to access in order to develop a proposal for climate action, or even country plans or entity work plans. So bringing together in one place, not replicating, but just making sure that there's clear links to all of the useful climate information that is already there, and because there is so much of it. And I think what I'd like to do through this initiative is just make sure that everyone is able to draw on the expertise, the international peer-reviewed science that is already there, and not for every single proposal have to necessarily reinvent the wheel, or to or to develop a climate modelling group, because that clearly makes no sense when so much information which is the foundation of proposals can be found in materials like the IPCC. So that's an activity that has already begun, and that I'm hoping will be able to show some significant outcomes during 2022, and then of course it's ongoing. It's a living and evolving entity, because all of these materials are refreshed, and that's part of the purpose, really, is to make sure that we're always directing our stakeholders, yourselves, the proposal developers, to the most up-to-date and correct materials. All of this, I should say, is in consultation with our technical advisory panel, so that we have a consistent approach to the way that we then subsequently review proposals and endorse them. And in the bottom box there, the reason behind all this is to make sure that we're providing consistent guidance, that we're actually helping and assisting. So I'd like to lend my voice to Ayaka's when I say that the sooner we can become involved in a project idea or a concept to help develop it, to help ensure that it's the right concept for GCF, then early engagement is the key to that. Here's just an example of some of the materials that were released in 2021 by the IPCC's 6th assessment report. One of the new materials is this interactive atlas. I've provided just a snapshot from it on the left there. The world is divided into regions, and you can see at a glance for something like temperature change or precipitation, whether the observations show an increase, whether that increase is or is not attributable to climate change, and then again a snapshot of information for the future, which for some proposals, a simple example would be a cooling proposal. The only information we really require that is relevant to the proposal is the evidence that the need to cool for health, for productivity, for safety is going to increase, and then any other form of climate information is not necessarily going to going to make that proposal any stronger. So the materials will be very heavily founded on the scientific literature that's already out there. And then when it comes to sort of understanding climate futures, that of course is where we rely entirely on the climate models run for the IPCC through the programs that are known as CMIP, the Coupled Model Intercomparison projections. And there are many tools out there which are available and which we are actually providing support around one of them to extract and to interpret information from future climate models. And the one where a GCF is directly involved is where we're collaborating with the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO. We call this the Climate Information Platform. You can see a snapshot of the landing screen on the bottom there. If you're not already aware of it, I can send you the link shortly after I finish this talk. And as well as co-developing this, we're engaged in an ongoing collaboration with the WMO to make sure that it's always up to date, to make sure that it always has access to the most recent climate information. And then another conversation we're having is about creating an international expert team where proposal developers need some particular help to interpret the results. Now, in many cases, accredited entities and countries have their own expertise, and we recognise that. And everything I'm going to say during this talk is about non-prescription. We're not ever going to tell people to use one tool above another. But where there are occasions where people would like some technical assistance, then we are trying to work with the WMO to create an international expert team that will do just that. And of course, as you know, through the GCF, there are various ways that we can support that financially. This is just a snapshot of that tool very quickly. This is the Climate Information Platform. It accesses what are called the regional climate models. So those are models with a 50-kilometer horizontal scale. So they give projections over an area that is usually commensurate with a project area. Some of the global climate models are too poorly resolved, for instance, to home in on a particular town or a district, whereas the regional climate models can. From the platform, you can get very quick headlines. The bottom right picture there of the key variables. And then if you click on the panel which invites you to look at the details, then you can start to see some of the spread of the different models. So the great thing about this platform and some of the others is that it uses a number of different climate models, and you can see to what degree they agree with one another or disagree, and then you can draw sensible conclusions about the spread of results. So for this particular example, which just happens to be for Belize, you can see that there are 3 climate models that were run, and 2 out of the 3 suggest a decrease in precipitation, and then the little box plot in the middle there shows the range of the different results. So it's a very useful platform, and we are creating training materials to help people use it. The picture at the bottom there shows another tool that is attached, which is a statistical tool to derive climate indicators. It's called ClimPact. That's also part of the package. And then, of course, there's the World Bank Knowledge Portal. I won't go into great detail on all of these, but all of these things have got different presentations of the information. In fact, the World Bank has recently updated all of its climate risk information profiles for countries. And if you were to click on the box that says variable at the bottom there, that would even produce some of the useful variables that you need for project design, like the number of days where heating is required, or the number of days where cooling is required. And again, this is all derived from what's called an ensemble, where you run many different climate models at different future scenarios. So these are all useful materials, and they will all be part of the toolkit that we're trying to put forward. So turning to climate rationale, I think an important place to start is that there is no single definition of climate rationale, and if you ask people what they mean by it, you will get a number of different answers. So I think the first thing we need to do is resolve that, and this is not just an issue for the GCF. In fact, recently the GEF, the Global Environment Forum, they also created a recent paper on climate rationale, where again they don't say what it is. So I think a very important thing is that we understand, if we're asking for climate rationale, what everyone understands by it. So we're preparing a policy paper for our board, the GCF board. I'm leading on that, and we hope that our board will take this paper in May of this year. And we're putting forward the very simple understanding that climate rationale is the narrative that ensures that the activities will address climate change. And I think Vlad introduced this himself. You know, we are a climate fund. We work under the articles of the UNFCCC, which makes clear that our activities are there to address climate change, and our governing instrument reinforces that. So that does not seem unreasonable if we define climate rationale as being the narrative that makes sure that all of our projects are climate related, and then that feeds in a very constructive way to our investment criteria, which Ayaka has spoken about, particularly impact potential. And then we go a little bit further and we say, and I should point out that these are proposals, these are definitions which we will put to our board, and hopefully our board will approve them so that we can all arrive at a common understanding. So they might be subject to some future change of words or an extra word here or there, because that's typical of any sort of board process. So we would say that mitigation actions would be looking for an ambitious level of emissions reductions, and that those reductions would not have happened without the GCF involvement. And then slightly more complicated for adaptation actions is that they need to provide an analysis that shows that the activities, you know, are likely to be an adaptive response, an effective one, to a specific threat of a climate hazard, which is having a specific impact. So that's what we're proposing. And then we're further suggesting that there are some principles. And I think something that's worth saying quickly is that all of this discussion can be taken in the context of creating a proposal. So we're trying to provide information that's transparent and consistent, which helps the creation of a proposal, but it also helps the assessment of a proposal. So people use the word guidance meaning many different things, and I usually use the word guidance meaning helping guide the development, and then assessment is assessing that it has done that. But the two things are very closely connected, and all of these principles are equally helpful in terms of, you know, providing that framework, that backbone of understanding to create a proposal, but also then being sure through that transparency that it's against those same principles that it's going to be assessed. I think that's a very important point that I'd like to make. And so we're putting forward a very non-prescriptive approach because, as I say, each proposal is unique. Very often you will need to provide data that is unique to that proposal, and there are many ways of doing that. So we don't want to suggest that one method stands out above all others, but there are some key principles which emerge. And so for mitigation, here they are. Actions need to align with country priorities. This touches on country ownership, which Ayaka has already spoken about, which is central to GCF's philosophy. They need to use a well understood, well referenced, credible methodological approach, which for mitigation there are hundreds of them, and we don't advise one over the other, so long as an appropriate one is selected. Demonstrate the additionality, that this is the characteristic that the project would not have occurred anyway, and then finally using the same assumptions that are used in national reporting to make sure that there's alignment and consistency of the emissions reductions calculations. And I won't go into this in great detail, but then we will have a background document, and I thank Vlad personally and other colleagues for helping develop this, which then drill into the details. This will be on the internet along with other training materials, along with the statement that we stand ready to help in any interpretation of these materials. And then for adaptation, again, some very high level principles, because perhaps more so than for mitigation, every adaptation proposal is likely to be unique. So first of all, identify what the problem is. Identify how the activities are connected to a particular climate change problem, either one that we're already seeing, or maybe one that's definitely projected, like heat extremes, and then identifying what that hazard, or how that hazard rather, results in risk. So how does that hazard intersect with vulnerability to create risk in a particular country or region? And then, having identified that clearly and made that connection, then demonstrating how the how the proposed actions are likely to reduce or remove the risk. And those two steps are of course interrelated, which is what I'm showing with the arrow there, and the Korean flag, which sort of nicely symbolizes the harmony between those two important principles. And then also the fact that it's aligned with country priorities, again, country ownership, and then finally, and this is true of all of our projects, and Vlad will talk more about this in the next session, about the need for a good monitoring and evaluation plan. And these principles are not unusual. I don't expect anyone to look at this, but I've color-coded the 4 principles of ours, and then I've mapped them against different organisations. So on the left, the IPCC's guidance for mitigation, and then a UNDP document for mitigation selection, and then some others. And you can see that these same principles of identify the problem, propose a suitable response, make sure there's good country policy alignment at all levels, and then monitoring and evaluation. These are common principles across different organisations. So we're confident that they do encapsulate the issue. And all of those methodologies that I've just presented there don't really help anyone choose an adaptation action. A lot of them are designed to answer the question, is it adaptation? Which of course the IPCC needs to do as it collects information for its report. The World Bank and the MDB, they need to do this. They need to ask that question ex post to track the flow of climate finance spending. But it doesn't help in selecting an adaptation option, and the reason for that is there is no menu, there is no lookup table of adaptation options. This is something that I think the international community could work on, although there will never be a lookup table. There are a lot of common considerations, and I've summarized those in a table here. This is from the 5th assessment report, and it shows some questions that should be discussed in a systems context when planners sit together with their experts to decide and prioritize their adaptation actions. And I just wanted to quickly show a slide which summarizes some of the headlines from the IPCC's report that was released yesterday, the report from Working Group 2, confirming, I think, what we've known for a long time now, that intense extreme events causing devastating impacts are now linked with high confidence to human-induced climate change. This report, it was released yesterday, estimates that somewhere between 3.3 and 3.6 billion are highly vulnerable. And again, some facts that I think just stress how important good adaptation selection is going to be over the coming decades. Even if we can hold the 1.5 degree target of the Paris Agreement, there will still be hazards. There will still be an increase in heat waves, extreme rainfall, and overshooting that, which is sometimes discussed in the scientific literature, would result in an increased severity. Many of these, of course, are irreversible in terms of the effect that they have on populations, where people live, ecosystems, and the decline of species. So adaptation is, I think, very central and key to everything we are going to be doing over the next many years. And some positive messages came out of the report about adaptation planning. It shows that when it's integrated, effective adaptation is based on a collective multi-sectoral solution that takes into account all social needs and equities in a region. So a completely cross-cutting systems-based approach has been shown to result in the best adaptation. And the final paragraph there is a direct quotation from the report, which shows it's about making those inclusive choices and being very clear about what the priority areas are. And so this is something which even Vlad hasn't seen. This is something which you are the first to see, which is going to be the central concept of how the GCF advises the development of adaptation, and also, in the spirit of full transparency, how we then assess those proposals. I'll talk you through it very quickly. At the top, there has to be an overarching goal, because against that backdrop that I've just described, that there's never a single way to pick an adaptation intervention, there has to be an overarching political, philosophical goal. that drives our choices. And for GCF, it makes sense that we should align that with the global goal on adaptation from the Paris Agreement, so making sure that all of those activities enhance adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change. So that, for us, is an overarching goal. And then just below it, and these things are in the sort of gold boxes, because I think these are the golden rules. Adaptation planning needs to ensure stakeholder involvement. That has been shown now by the IPCC to result in the best adaptation. And then adaptation actions need to be coordinated with other economic and development actions. And all of these things need to be integrated together into policy and planning. Standalone is not an effective way to drive adaptation. So there are the golden rules. And then sat below them are those 4 steps that I just discussed now, previously rather, which are the same steps as many other organisations take. And the top 2, the identification of the response, that articulation, that narrative needs to use the best available data, but very clearly drawing on the data that's most relevant to a proposal. And I'll talk a bit more about data needs in a moment. And then at the bottom, what materials exist to help this? Well, something we can discuss, and I think it's an idea I'd like to discuss, is the idea that we come up with a list of guidance questions. It would be non-exhaustive by definition. But if we use those guidance questions, you can frame it as a question, but you can also frame it as a suggestion, to put that in your proposal, in the knowledge that that's what an assessor would then be looking for in the proposal. So through that transparency, we make sure that the review process is fair and that everyone understands the questions that assessors might be asking, and I think this is something we need to discuss within the GCF, but we could, if everyone thinks that's a good idea, then just request that be placed in one of our usual annexes. So that's the overall framework for adaptation, selection and assessment. And I wrote down just very quickly, 8 questions. I could probably come up with 20. And we could all agree that those are sensible questions that you need to ask when making a project selection, but they're also sensible questions that a reviewer would use when assessing it. And of course, when you're reviewing, then you would use either a quantitative or a qualitative method, whether the proposal shows it to a high degree or medium degree. And that allows for the inevitable subjectivity. It maintains the fact that we do have an independent technical advisory panel who are allowed to disagree with me. I might think that the answer to one of those questions is a very high answer. They might think it's a medium high, but this approach is completely transparent, but still allows for a difference of opinion, which then leads to moderation. So that's something I'd be very happy to discuss in more detail. And I think it's sufficient to say about data that the bottom paragraph there is the crucial paragraph, and this we will write very clearly into the policy paper. We want to make it clear, we want to make it explicit that any country, anywhere, which is either data poor or where the data is for some reason of insufficient quality, is not a reason to turn a proposal away. There are many reasons for small island states in particular to think that if the climate hazard, the threat, is incontrovertible, if it's something on which all of the scientific literature agrees, sea level would be an obvious example where there's absolutely no reason not to believe the international view on sea level, and there's likewise no reason to disbelieve the view of local experts, local communities, local governments about the threat that sea level poses, then that is the same. That is the synergistic match. It's the yin and the yang that I was referring to earlier, where there's a very clear articulation of a problem, and it's explicitly connected to an indisputable climate hazard. So the policy guidance will be very clear about this, and it will make it clear that any proposal has to draw on the best and most appropriate and not specified data set. And also, and I won't go into this now, but I'm happy to take some questions. The written guidance that we put on that information gateway will describe global data sets and their uses where there is perhaps no local data for any of those reasons. And also will include some explicit text on how local traditional knowledge should be used. And the reason for this, of course, is that the policy paper itself can't list every possible data source, but the dynamic internet-based repository, which is why I chose to start my talk with that can contain everything that's useful to our proposal developers, to our accredited entities, and that we will work with the other climate finance mechanisms to make sure that all of those materials are recognised, up to date, and where there are gaps, then we'll find ways to fill those gaps. I just wanted to talk very, very quickly about the idea of 30 years of data. So, you know, it has become a common refrain that people are often asked to provide 30 years of data. Why 30 years? And I think I refer everyone back to this slide here. We are going to make it clear that, you know, there are some instances where perhaps 30 years of data are important, but not every instance, and it's not a default requirement. The reason the WMO settle on 30 years is what they call a climate normal, and it just provides a baseline for climatologists. So when climatologists are reporting average temperatures for the year 2022, they like to compare it against something, and what they compare it with is the 30-year climate normal, which traditionally was 1961 to 1990, but climate is changing so fast that WMO changed that recently. So it's not a particular requirement, but it is useful for climatologists. If you're lucky enough to have 30 years of data, then obviously it provides a very good baseline. And the other thing that it is useful for is where you're using some climate indicators. So one is called the Standardized Precipitation Evapotranspiration Index, the SPEI. That provides an index of drought conditions over months and years and many years. And in order to do that, it needs a long baseline period of rainfall and drought conditions in order to calculate that index. So in this particular example, 30 years is just a useful period of time to make the calculation of that index feasible. And then, of course, it's quite often used in climate models. If you go to any of those climate model sites I spoke about earlier, you'll find that they break the climate model output into 30-year chunks. But it's not in any sense a formal definition of climate, and you know, I will have that argument or that conversation with anyone if necessary. Most textbooks will say that climate is the average of the weather over a few decades, or more complicated phrases to that effect. But our data requirements will make it very clear that what we're looking for proposal development is the data that is relevant to that specific proposal. And I think the final thing to say is, you know, since climate change is a problem of the future, why do we use historical data? Well, it's a starting point, and in many cases, climate change is already being experienced, and we can prove it. Heat waves, extreme rainfall, sea level rise are just 3 examples of that. But even if the climate intervention is one intended for the future, the current and the historical dating provides a narrative, and this is something where we would agree with the IPCC, is the value of bringing together multiple lines of evidence. So for some future climate projections, and rainfall is one that contains a great deal of uncertainty, the future climate projections alone perhaps don't always provide a convincing case that drought is an existential threat. But if historical evidence does, then it's the combination of what's currently being observed with what's likely to happen in the future that combine to create a much more powerful argument. And that's, I think, what we're saying in that final paragraph there. For a particular country, if you can use current data or historical data to say that drought is a problem or flash flooding is a problem, and then you can use the future climate model projections, which may not be 100% clear around rainfall, but the very basic science of a warmer atmosphere says that a warmer atmosphere will hold more water. And then, you know, combining those strands of evidence, you can say there's clear evidence of drought in country X. One thing we can be sure of in the future is it's not likely to rain any less, and the intensity of rainfall is not going to be any less. And then those 2 facts between them combine to give a very strong argument for a particular climate action. So just to summarise, just wanted to bring to your attention the fact that we're promoting and supporting and helping provide the explanation how to use climate tools, making sure those tools and data are always available and up to date. We are providing clear guidance, and we will continue to do this and publish it, ideally with the approval of our board in the early part of this year. But I think, even if that gets delayed, we will go ahead and present these mitigation and adaptation guides in some form on the internet so that they can be used, because I think that's the most important thing here. And then finally, just to reassure you that what we like to do is work very closely to give all of the training, all of the support, to just break down the barriers to accessing GCF funds when you've got a good proposal. So I'll stop there. I'll take any questions now and indeed by email afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for this very rich and extremely interesting presentation. And yeah, I confirm that some of the things you introduced today I haven't seen before, but it was very interesting, and I hope that all of our participants really enjoyed it. So I would like to open the Q&A session, and I already see Eugene Williams' hand. Eugene is from CDF. So Eugene, please.
Hi, good night, good morning, depending on where you are. Are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I have a question. I mean, I have a simple, I admit, I have a simple mind. It strikes me that the IPCC has already done all of the studies across the globe, different authors, etc., making the case for climate rational so that the GCF can go to various funders, institutions to gather money to then support activities in the climate space. Having done that, why then am I, as an islander or a small island state, is being asked to provide a climate rationale for an activity that I want to do, which has already been defined by the IC as one of critical importance because I'm a small island state and it's going to affect me. They have made the rationale for it already. But then you're now asking me, make the rationale so that you can then tell me whether I can get the money or not. I mean, it's as simple as that to me, but maybe I'm missing something. So, Professor.
No, not at all. Well, if you are missing anything, it was only the bit in the presentation when I said that I completely agree with that. So where the IPCC and where other science as well has made it incontrovertible that there's a particular hazard, and where, as a small islander, you know better than anyone what the effects of that hazard are. It's important that you're able to show it. Obviously, in any proposal for anything, we have to at least write down what the issues are. But given that IPCC has already done the science, and that you as an islander are more familiar than anyone with what the impact is, then for me that is completely enough for the rationale. I did say that, perhaps I skipped over it. And importantly, the policy paper will be saying that in slightly in a slightly longer sentence. But basically, that's it. Yes, you have a very good point, and I agree with you.
Yeah, but yet still, the GCF requires and mandates that you make that case again. That's the point I'm making.
Well, it's not that you remake the case, it's only that you provide a succinct summary of the relevant part of the IPCC, and then the local records, the local evidence that show whatever the problem is. So it's not asking anyone to do any additional work. It's simply like any funder, we have forms, we have procedures, and those forms have to be sent in. It's not, we couldn't accept a form that just had a country's name at the top. There has to be some information in the white boxes, but I'm completely on your side that you don't have to create any new analysis, but just take the most appropriate synthesis of that analysis and put it into those boxes. And yes, if we have to change the structure of our forms, of our concept notes, to make that easier, then that's something I think that we can discuss. But you, Vlad will confirm that there are other factors than me just wanting to change a concept note. But if we identify that there are easier ways of asking you to present that information, then we can prioritize those within the bureaucracy.
Yeah, that is something I think that needs to be looked at. How can we make it easier for applicants to really cross the hurdles?
Yeah, but definitely there will be no expectation for any further scientific analysis or indeed any further analysis, but just to present the information that you know to be relevant. And I will be supporting that in policy form, in a much longer form.
Thank you, Kevin, and also thank you, Eugene, for the very interesting question. And I think Kevin managed to demystify one very important point. So I can see that there is a second question that came from the Bank of the Cook Islands. Is it possible for you to read the question, please? I cannot see the name here.
I can read it out if
okay.
you like, Vlad, and then I'll answer it. So it's from the Bank of the Cook Islands, and the question is, for SIDS, total emissions are negligible, with global contributions very close to 0%, and also the private sector is very small. So how would they demonstrate attaining an ambitious level of emissions? Is it sufficient that the NDCs are ambitious? And so I think you were just picking up on the word that I used in one of my sentences there. I did have the word ambitious. The answer is yes, it has to. So ambitious has to be relative to the size of the country, to the size of its emissions. Ambition is scalable and changeable. So I did not mean to imply by that that small countries need to aspire to the emissions reductions of large countries, merely that they are ambitious in local terms. And I don't want anyone to get hung up on the word ambitious. We have to put ambitious sounding language in our policy papers in order to make it clear that the GCF is an ambitious organisation, but it's not meant to imply unreasonable or unattainable. So I hope that answers.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, colleagues from the Bank of the Cook Islands. I can see the thumbs up, so that is a good sign. I'm just looking if there are any other raised hands or questions from the audience at the moment. But maybe while we are waiting for those additional questions, let me ask one question from my side. And Kevin, we work very closely together, but that question is another part of the demystification of the approach to climate rationale. So I often hear the criticism that there is kind of an implicit requirement that our accredited entity should have like one climate scientist on board as well in order to prepare a funding proposal. Is that really the case? And how we can, and you also mentioned that in your presentation, but maybe you can repeat once again about the support that we can provide as a secretariat in that aspect. Thank you.
Thanks, Vlad. So I don't think there is any implicit expectation that a proposal team should have any particular constitution. I mean, I think in the spirit of non-prescription and in the spirit of respecting all of the capabilities and skill sets of our stakeholders, I would trust our stakeholders to put together the best team to build a proposal. Now, some of our stakeholders maybe will have access to a climate scientist, either on their staff or through a university. And we know that in the Caribbean and Pacific regions, there are some very strong agencies locally to draw upon. And if they choose to do that, then obviously that enables them to create a strong proposal. But there's absolutely no implicit understanding that that's necessary. So what I was referring to, of course, was there are some occasions where, in order to make the necessary interpretations, to provide the 4 or 5 pages of text that provides the narrative that I've been talking about, you might prefer a climate scientist to assist in doing that. And if you haven't got one, then what I'm trying to do with the WMO is to create a body of international experts, climate scientists in different fields, who can act as an international expert team on demand. And so I'm trying to cater for every possibility with that, from entities that do require that support, right through to entities who've got their own capabilities locally. Because I think it's important to recognise that every proposal is different, every team is different. But no, absolutely no explicit requirement that you should have a climate scientist on your staff. That's unnecessary replication, because there are so many out there. And then the other thing, of course, Vlad, is that we can also, through our own rosters of consultants, we have sector experts who are extremely helpful in terms of actually building the structure of a proposal, or the nature of an intervention around whatever sector, be it agriculture or biodiversity or infrastructure. So within the GCF, we already have these rosters of sector specialists. What I'm trying to create is an equivalent roster of climate specialists that can be used on demand.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kevin. That was a very clear explanation. And once again, let me check if there are any questions coming from the audience. Okay, I don't see any for now. Okay, so in that case, because we're getting closer to the time of our next break, I want to thank you, Kevin, again for this very detailed and focused presentation, and want to invite everybody to a 10-minute break. We'll have the third session after that, where I will talk about result management in the GCF theories of change and logical framework development. After that, we'll go through the concept note structure, and again, we'll have a Q&A session. So please think if there are any questions that you would like to ask us also towards the end of the session. But once again, thank you very much for your active participation up to now, and see you again in 10 minutes, which will be basically 5 minutes to the hour. Thank you again.
Change and log frame. The result management under the integrated results management framework, which will be provided by Vlad. So that will be done in 30 minutes. In the following 10 minutes, Vlad and I will dig further into the structure of the concept note, where we will share the template and walk you through the essentials and what we're looking for in each section by section. And it will be followed by the Q&A for 15 minutes. With further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Vlad for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ayaka. Let me share the presentation on the screen. Okay. I hope you can. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. And once again, very good afternoon.
Maybe not in the, Brad, maybe we can make this a presentation mode.
Okay, so you don't see it in presentation?
I don't see it in the presentation mode.
All right, just give me a second. Okay. Can you see it now?
Something is coming up, but still not seeing the presentation mode. We see the slide and your power. Okay, there you go. We see it now.
Okay, so you can see it. Okay, perfect. So once again, a very good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for joining us today. So I will talk about the result management in the GCF and the integrated result management framework. And that is one of the topics that it's very important to be covered, especially when you talk about developing funding proposals and also concept notes, the early stages. So today I will talk about the result management in the GCF in general. I'll talk about the theory of change and also the logical framework. And I hope that by the end of this presentation, I'll be able to convince you how important actually result management is and how important theories and logical frameworks are. I will not go into the details of the integrated result management framework. I'll touch upon it, but there is a separate webinar that the recording of which is available on the GCF website, where we do an introduction to the RMF. So please watch that recording in case you have not done it. Today, I'll try to focus on more practical guidance in explaining result management and what you really need to look into when you develop concept notes and funding proposals. So let me start from the result management part and the overview of that. And here is just a quotation from our governing instrument of what we do as an organization. And it basically said it in the context of sustainable development, the fund, the GCF, will promote paradigm shift towards low emission and climate resilient development pathways by providing support to developing countries to limit or reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and to adapt to the impacts of climate change, taking into account the needs of those developed countries, particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. I think most of us have seen that statement already there. But what that means in relation to result management is that result management is basically the key in assessing how the GCF as a fund, as an investor, how our investments delivered the climate results and how projects and program results contribute to the overall objectives of the GCF. In other words, result management really allow us, and they allow you also as our partners, to understand how efficient our interventions are and where we are helping you to achieve your climate change objectives, your goals in terms of adaptation and mitigation. And I think Kevin already touched upon this even in his presentation. In that sense, result management is an integral part of the design of each GCF project or program, because it helps accredited entities to structure the projects in such a way that they can track and measure results and ensure that countries increase resilience, bioadaptive capacity, or reduce GHG emissions. And the key elements where you can see result management in practice as part of the funding proposal are your theory of change and the logical framework. So on the next slide, you can see actually our result architecture, and that result architecture will probably allow you to also understand better how what exactly is the flow of results from what individual projects do to what eventually is expected to be achieved in terms of paradigm shift potential. So under the new integrated result management framework, we look at all individual projects and programs, how they contribute to mitigation and adaptation and creating enabling environment, and eventually how these contribute to paradigm shift potential. So we look at this at a fund level, but you also have to analyze this at an individual funding proposal stage for each program or project. And by looking at your project ideas from this perspective, you can also see how exactly you can generate the necessary mitigation or adaptation impact. So the tool that really helps you look into the generation of impact is your theory of change. I very often get the question whether the theory of change is something important, or whether the theory of change is something that you really should focus on. I'll try to explain to you in the next few slides that actually the theory of change is it should be the backbone of your proposal. And this is something that you really should spend a lot of time analyzing and designing before you even start developing the details of your proposal, because your proposal actually is based on the theory of change. And the theory of change also incorporates, among other things, the pathways to which you eventually address various climate vulnerabilities, reduce emissions, and eventually move to low emission or resilient pathways. So what exactly is a theory of change, and why do you need it? Well, first of all, it's a methodological approach. It's a model. And this helps accredited entities, project developers, to design and plan projects by defining the long-term project goals and objectives. What does it mean? I mean, if you think about the projects that you have worked on, or the projects that you have designed, probably the first step that you always take, or the question that you ask yourself, is really, why am I doing that? What is the final goal of this project? What do I want to achieve through this project? So a good project is actually a project where you clearly know what you're trying to achieve. What are the long-term objectives, or what are the long-term goals? And once you understand that, you can actually build a project around those final goals and objectives. And the theory of change gives you the model through which you can do that. And on the opposite, a project is not really a good project when you cannot see from when you read it what exactly you're trying to achieve. So the first important reason to look at the theory of change is really to help you design and plan your project by defining the outcomes now and the goals. Now, once you know what your project goals and objectives are, you can move to the next step where you map backwards and identify and hypothesize about the necessary preconditions for meeting those goals. So what exactly do you have to do in order to achieve the particular goal? And then when you know that, you can articulate what the planned project or program outcomes and outputs are that will allow you to achieve that particular goal of the project. So all accredited entities, when they look at the theory of change and at their project, they have to ensure that they build a TOC that is based on some robust assumptions which are well understood. You also have to make sure that you know what type of barriers you're trying to address, and what kind of risks are also there in place and which you have to take into consideration. And once you understand all of this, and once you do this planning, you can actually build a theory of change which looks very similar to what you have here on the right side, which basically will show how your project, which consists of different activities, leads to particular outputs, which contribute to outcomes and co-benefits, which eventually contribute to your final goal related to paradigm shift. So building the theory of change allows you to go step by step through this process and understanding how everything is going to happen in your project, what the different steps are in order to achieve the final goals and the final objectives of the project. And at the same time, you also think what type of barriers you'll be overcoming, what risks you have to address. So ideally, the theory of change explains how change is understood to come about, rather than simply linking activities to expected results with an arrow. And that's an important thing that you also should keep in mind when you work on the theory of change. Now, what is the theory of change for? Why do you need this? Well, first of all, it guides strategic policy planning and to identify the current situation in terms of needs and opportunities, the intended situation, and what needs to be done to move forward. And also your theory of change allows you to design more realistic goals, to clarify accountabilities, the various roles, and establish a common understanding of what is really happening. And I can tell you from practical experience looking at the GCF portfolio that those projects that have had well-designed theory of change were those that eventually are performing much better. And on the opposite, once you fail to design a good theory of change, you really struggle during the implementation of your project. So you basically, when you look at the theory of change, you are also able to identify later on which indicators you should monitor during implementation to see whether you're on track to achieve the results. The theory of change also allows you to communicate better to various stakeholders like your staff, funders, partners on how your project or program works. Later on, this will support also the evaluation of your project and program performance. And it's also a tool for learning. It allows you to understand how you can perform better, what works and what doesn't work. And this is extremely important in the field of climate change when we are trying to come with more efficient and more impactful interventions that help countries really in their combat with climate change, in reducing the impact of climate change. So what are the steps that you have to take if you want to formulate a theory of change? What do you have to do when you look at your projects and you want to start developing the theory of change? I went already briefly through some of the steps, but let me repeat that once again. And the first step is really the formulation of your goal. So you have to answer the question, what I want to do, what exactly the problem is. And based on that, you have to establish what the project goal is. And it's important to emphasize here that the goal of a project is not what the project does on its own, but it's what the project contributes to achieving, what the project is, what the final achievement of the project is. And once you are clear about the problem and the project goal, then you can move to the second step, which is the formulation of the goal statement. And when we talk about the goal statement in the GCF, we have adopted the approach of formulating it in the if, then, because format, that if you do a particular intervention, then you're going to have particular outcomes or results because you have certain conditions put in place. And we usually ask our accredited entities also to come up with a goal statement in that format, because it allows us within one sentence to understand what actually this project is about. And it helps further down when we design the other parts of the theory of change. Once you come up with a goal statement, and because this is a backward process, you're moving down from the top here when you have the goal statement to outcome, benefits, outputs. In the third step, you have to think what kind of outcomes and what kind of co-benefits you need in order to be able to achieve the project goal. And in that case, you can think about outcomes which are related to climate change. So this can be like increase the resilience of communities, for example. You can have also outcomes related to enabling environment, and you can have also various co-benefits as well. And our integrated result management framework has a very clear set of outcomes and also climate change related outcomes and enabling environment related outcomes that help you in the formulation of your project outcomes as well. And depending on the specific project conditions, you can also think about what type of co-benefits you need so that you'll be able to achieve your final project goal. And once you go through these first three steps, you can move to the next level and think about the outputs which are basically the results of your activities that you can directly control. So what you need to think about it, what you need to understand is, in order to achieve the outcomes and the particular co-benefits that you identified before, what type of outputs really you need to have in place to allow you for these outcomes or co-benefits to materialize. And once you're clear about that, then you'll be able to rearrange the activities of your project, come up with new activity sets that will allow you to move along from activities to outputs, outcomes, and finally achieve the goal of the project. So it's kind of a process of, as I said, backward mapping that understands what exactly, that helps you understand what exactly should be included in your projects and what should not be included. And one problem that we see very often in the GCF, but I would say that this is a common problem for every organization, is that when you build the theory of change, you actually identify that maybe some of the activities that you originally planned are not really necessary there because they do not help you in any way to achieve the final goals of the project. Or sometimes you also identify that in order to achieve the project goals, you probably need certain outcomes supported by particular activities you have not included. And then you can redesign the project in order to help that materialize. So going through these steps really helps you have a much clearer picture of what you really need in order to achieve the final goal. Now, you should always keep in mind that, of course, this is a model that you're building in advance. And that model, first of all, relies on a number of assumptions. And this is what you need to think about in the fifth step of your theory of change formulation. What actually are the assumptions? What are the conditions that should be in place for us to be able to move from outputs to outcomes and finally to the goal? And your assumptions can be a favorable policy environment. The assumptions can be linked also to certain behavior of the stakeholders, etc. But you have to keep that in mind. And when you put down the assumptions, you have to see to what extent these assumptions are realistic. And maybe if you find that certain assumptions are not realistic, you can think again what you can change in your TOC design and your project design that will allow a more realistic pathway. Finally, you have to go and identify which are the barriers that you're going to overcome and what are the risks that are there. And in this step, you'll be able to see that maybe you're not addressing all the barriers that are in place, and maybe you're not mitigating all the risks in place. So this, again, will allow you to rethink the overall project structure. I think that from all of this, you got one of the key messages about theories of change, and that is that it's a fine-tune, it's an iterative process. You need to do fine-tuning all the way while you're building a theory of change. So at every step, you have to rethink also the previous steps until you finally come up with a theory of change that describes very clear logical pathways for achieving the project goals. And once you have that in place, you'll be able to really design a much stronger and much more impactful project. So the key takeaways from this part of the presentation are that the TOC is not something that is just required by the Secretariat. This is actually an integral part of any funding proposal, even if it is a sub-proposal. And you have to spend an extensive time thinking about the TOC and what exactly is happening based on it with your project. And it's important to develop your TOC as part of your concept note, even as an example, even in a separate annex. And we'll talk about this later on together with Ayaka. In the TOC template, we do not have a specific place for including the TOC, but as most of you working with us have noticed, we really encourage that you provide a TOC annex as part of the concept note. And working through the TOCs at an early stage has already showed us that helps improve the quality of concept notes. And the last thing, but probably like one of the most important things that you need to keep in mind, again, is that the TOC should be the starting point for conceptualization of your project and program. And you also have to try to develop it in a participatory manner. It means that it shouldn't be just one consultant sitting in a dark room and looking through a TOC, but you should also involve various stakeholders in the country to help you build the TOC, to help you look at the assumptions at the barriers, so that there is also a strong buy-in for the TOC, which will, again, ensure the success of your project. Now, having talked about the TOC, it's good time to move to the next part, where I'll talk about logical framework and what exactly it is about. And logical frameworks and TOCs are very closely linked. And while the TOC provides you with a model of how you achieve the final project goal, the logical framework actually comes with indicators that allow you to measure whether you're on track for achieving results, indicators that help you actually measure the results that you have achieved, test some of the assumptions, etc. In our integrated result management framework, and again, you can see the result architecture here, we have a set of indicators already included as part of our mitigation and adaptation core and sub-indicators. But also for each project, you can come up with your individual project-specific indicators. You usually develop the logical framework as part of the funding proposal. So this is section E of the project approval process, or the large-scale projects, or Annex 2 for SAPs. And the logical framework, or as we call it, the log frame, it's integrally linked to the TOC. So having a well-developed TOC, it always allows you to have a clear logical framework and a clear set of indicators that allow you to measure results, to measure change. And as I mentioned, you should look both at incorporating indicators from the RMF and also some project-specific indicators. And on the next slide, you can actually see the linkages between the different sections of the logical framework and the TOC. I'll take you to the sections of the logical framework just in a minute, but I have used these arrows here on the slide to show what part of the logical framework links to what part of the TOC. So in section E2 of the logical framework, for example, you talk about paradigm shift, and that is linked to the goal statement of your project, because your goal statement actually should look at how your project contributes to paradigm shift. Section E3, which is about GCF outcome indicators, is linked to the outcome section and co-benefit section of your TOC. Section E4 is about enabling environment, and this is also linked to the co-benefits and some of the outcomes that you have here. And in section 5, you have project-specific indicators, which are mainly linked to the project-specific outputs, but you can also have some project-specific outcomes which are not covered by the GCF result management framework. And finally, in section E6, you have to describe the individual project activities, and this is linked also to what you have here in the TOC diagram as project activity. So as you can see, there are very clear linkages between the different parts of the logical framework and the TOC, and it is very important that you actually work on the TOC and on the log frame together, come up with a clear TOC, and then come up with indicators that can support that TOC. And our new result management framework has managed successfully to strengthen those linkages as much as possible. So let me show you in the next few slides what happens actually in the funding proposal template. And again, we have a separate webinar that describes how exactly to fill the new template. So I won't go into details, but again, I recommend you to really look at, to watch that particular webinar. But I'll just get you through the individual sections that will help you understand what is expected from you in terms of log frame development. And the first important part of section E that you should look at is section E2, which is about the GCF impact level, which now we define as the paradigm shift potential. And you should look at paradigm shift from 3 different dimensions, which are scale, replicability, and sustainability. And here you just have to provide a very brief narrative, which is based on other parts of the funding proposal as well, on what are the different dimensions of paradigm shift, what the current situation or the baseline is, and what kind of change you're expecting to see as a result of the project. If you have developed well your TOC actually and the barrier analysis of other parts of your funding proposal, it will be very easy to come up with the information here. Then you have section E3, which basically aligns with the RMF indicators from 1 to 4, and it looks into the 8 result areas of the GCF and the indicators, the co-indicators and the sub-indicators associated with them. So what you have to do here is select the appropriate indicators in the context of your project, provide a means of verification, the baseline for those indicators, the targets, and against the assumptions that are linked to achieving the particular targets. And if you open our RMF, you can see that we have indicators that are linked to GHG emission reductions, indicators linked to improved resilience, number of beneficiaries. But all of those indicators actually allow you to measure the outcomes of your project, the results of your project, and also checking whether you are on track to deliver those results. Then you have another section, which is section E4, which is about enabling environment. And here basically I have to describe the baselines in relation to the enabling environment indicators of the RMF, and these indicators from 5 to 8 and the relevant sub-indicators. Again, this is in a narrative format. You just have to provide for at least 2 indicators, the baselines and also the targets that you expect to achieve. And section E5, I consider it the most interesting part of the log frame, because this is the section where you have to demonstrate that you can select, in addition to the RMF indicators, some project-specific indicators that will allow you to measure the project outputs or some project-specific outcomes which are not RMF related. And also in this section, you have the opportunity to come up with indicators that are related to co-benefits. And our integrated result management framework puts a particularly strong focus on the measurement of co-benefits, especially in cases when this is applicable. And finally, you have section E6, which is the same section as you had in the original funding proposal template. But this section is also very important because this is where you put all the activities that you have in the project as well as the sub-activities. What is important here, and this is one point I always emphasize, and this is important both at, even when you're thinking of the project concept, but even more important when you think about developing a funding proposal, is that whatever activities you have in the logical framework in section E6, you need to have the same activities in section B. You also need to have the same activities in your budget, in your implementation timetable. So please make sure that there is a full alignment between what you have as activities here and activities in other part of the funding proposal. And these activities, by the way, should correspond also to the activities or the activity sets that you have in your theory of change. So as you can see, your log frame actually allows you to come up with indicators and also activities that transform your theory of change into some measurable set of indicators. And this allows you over time to really see where your project is on track and where your project is delivering results. So the key takeaways for that part of the presentation, and this is my last slide before I stop for the Q&A session, is that you need a TOC and you need also indicators, because you can claim only those results that can be measured. You can say that you have achieved results only if you can measure that those results can be achieved. And again, what I repeat at the end of this presentation is that you need a very well-structured TOC, and based on that, a very well-structured log frame, because these are going to be the prerequisites for a good project that can generate good climate results. And this is also a way to help you as accredited entities to look for really like impactful investments that can help you in the combat against climate change. So I will stop here, and I want to thank you again for your attention. I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Vlad. Great presentation, and fully agree with you that great TOC is key to the success of the project. I'm just looking at the chat. Please, dear audiences, if you have any questions, feel free to type into the chat or raise your hand. We'll be happy to take them. While we wait for the participants to ask some questions, well, I'd like to ask some questions to you myself, if that's okay.
Please.
So I think whenever I see the theory of change and the development of the concept note, it's always a question when exactly a theory of change should be finalized. My first question is it okay to come up with the theory of change at a later stage of project development?
Okay. Thank you, Ayaka. Now, that's a very good question, and this is a question that comes very often also in our discussions with AEs. There is no one-side question. My recommendation is to develop the TOC as early as possible. So please think of your theory of change even before you start developing the concept note. Actually, your concept note should be centered around a very well-developed TOC. So when you start the project development, you should first gather the stakeholders and make sure that you agree together on what the TOC is going to be before you even come up with the development of your concept note. Of course, you can come later, and we have seen that case happening, although I would say that not so much recently. But you're taking a very big risk, because if you come up with a proposal and you don't have a clear TOC, there is a very high possibility that there won't be very clear linkages between what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. And this is what we see very often. So at the end of the day, that will lead to you getting more questions or more requests for changes from the different reviewers when the project is being approved. And that will make the whole process much more complicated, and probably link even like to some further delays into getting the process, the project or the program through our internal processes. So really the answer is you can come up later. I mean, that is also fine, but please, my very strong recommendation is to develop the TOC maybe as the first step of even conceptualizing a project, and then based on that TOC move through the finalizing of the concept note, finalization of the funding proposal later. Again, I also mentioned that in the presentation, the TOC development is an iterative process. So you may have to do changes into the TOC as you move along, but these are going to be just fine-tuning changes. You don't have to go through some fundamental changes if you have a well-developed TOC early on. So that will be my answer at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Vlad, for the detailed response. I see Aquila has raised the hand. Aquila, would you like to unmute yourself and come in with your question?
Yeah, thank you, Fujiwara. Thank you, Vlad, for that very excellent presentation. My question is, after you have developed the theory of change, and then the logical framework, and then you develop that with your concept note as part of your concept note development. And my second question related to that is, are the theory of change and logical framework both compulsory when you are developing concept notes for GCF? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aquila. Okay, so I'll start with the second question. And the second question, the answer is that they're not compulsory, they're not mandatory. So technically you can submit a concept note without the theory of change. But we very strongly recommend that the theory of change is included as an annex to the concept note, just because that will help you really in coming with a much clearer project idea and much better articulated project idea. So this is something that we have been seeing also with the concept notes that have been coming to us recently. The good ones really have already a TOC developed. Now, regarding the logical framework, you don't have to include it at the concept note stage. This is something that you can work on as part of the funding proposal. But one part of the logical framework that you may wish to think about, even at a concept note stage, is section E6, whereas you have the activities. So when you come up with your concept note, maybe you want to think about also the activities that you want to have as part of your project. So just to summarize my answers, my apologies. Just to summarize my answer, it is not important to, it is not mandatory to include the theory of change and log frame, but at least it is recommended to have a TOC included as part of your concept note.
Thank you, Vlad. I also see the question from Vane, Jenny, and Anna from Bank of the Cook Island. Would you like to come in with your question and unmute yourself?
Yes, our question was, do we need to complete a full concept note first before we reach out to the GCF private sector facility, or can we reach out when we have more of a concept brief per se, for example, a rough draft of our theory of change to determine the private sector facility's appetite before we progress time and effort into a full concept note?
Okay. Vlad, would it be all right if I take that question? All right.
Yeah, I think that question is for you, actually.
Oh, yeah,
yes,
think
please.
So. All right, thank you. Thank you so much for the question. It's very relevant. I think from our side, you don't need to develop a full concept note before reaching out to us. There should definitely be a more informal talks and discussions before you actually put a lot of efforts and time into the concept note. And we are aware that it takes it's quite time consuming. Usually what we do is after the accredited entity does the due diligence, if there is any accredited entity involved, we ask for the accredited entity to send us over the concept and project idea, not the concept note, but the project idea, so that we can proceed with a really informal feedback on that. And depending on that, we can also proceed with a calls to discuss the details. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. That does answer the question. I suppose the follow-up question is there a specific format that we must follow with regards to presenting a concept brief, or just
okay, sure, I can answer that. Normally we would receive a 2-pager, like a teaser that summarizes the idea of what you're trying to do, and a brief draft of a theory of change would also be something that is not required, but it's something that is nice to have.
Excellent. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Okay. Unless there are other questions, I think, Vlad, we are ready to move on to the next part, which is walking through of the concept note. Shall we do that?
Yes, Ayaka, let's do that. I think that's also a very important part of the training today,
Yes.
Especially because we expect our participants to come back to us with draft concept notes. and present them back on March 18th.
That is correct. All right, let's dig right into it. Thank you so much for sharing the screen. So here in this section, we're just going to walk you through the concept note so that you're fully familiar with each section of the concept note. And there's going to be another Q&A at the very end, so you can ask questions. But Vlad and I will elaborate over here to explain to you, hopefully give you a good idea on what we are looking to see. Okay, next page, please. And next page. So this A section is essentially a project program summary. It's mostly administrative, but we're looking to see what are the result areas for the project or programs, whether it's mitigation, adaptation, whether it is public sector, private sector, and A1 is project or program. So whether we're approving one single project or we're approving a program that will invest into multiple projects. A10 section require you to specify what exactly you're looking for from GCF, whether it's grant or guarantee or equity or loans. In the case of private sector, we must have the tick on one of the return-bearing instruments, so equity, subordinated, or senior loan. We would like you to specify whether you need project finance, project preparation facility to prepare for the delivery of concept note and ESS category. This is something that needs to be submitted by the accredited entity. So in A17, we ask if the AMA, the master accreditation agreement, has been signed between the accredited entity and GCF, because if it's not signed between AE and the GCF, it cannot go forward. So yeah, that's briefly it for this A section. Next page, please. Right, so here B1 section, we are asking for the context and baseline, mainly related to the climate vulnerabilities, impact, GHG emission profile that are going to be addressed through the project or program. B2 is more into the specifics of your project or program that you're thinking about. So we need you to describe the kind of activities in the proposal and how is the executing entity and accredited entity are well placed to undertake those activities that you describe, and as well as the risks, the operational and the financial risks that you envision, as well as the mitigation measures that will be taken. B3 section is linked to my presentation earlier on the investment criteria. So here we would ask you to go in details for each of the 6 investment criteria and show us the relevance between those criteria and the project. B4 is about the country engagement. So we ask you to describe the engagement that you've had with NDA, National Designated Authority, and accredited entity in terms of getting the engagement from them. C section is really important because that's where we're going to see the co-financing from other investors versus GCF, as well as how GCF money is placed in the structure. So this is where we need to clearly understand whether GCF is needed for a first loss position, concessional finance, and what are the other investors' position in that. So if it's a pari passu agreement, it has to be clarified over here, and the seniority of each participant. Moving on to the next slide, we also have the C section continues. And so C2 is the justification of GCF funding request. Why do you think that it is rational for GCF to provide the concessional finance into this project? And the C3 is the more about replicability of the project. Why do you think it's a scalable project? Why do you think the same structure, similar ideas can be replicated in a similar region? Because we really want to see that happen in scale. And our idea is to come in to support it at the most vulnerable stage, so that once it builds the track record, it can replicate on its own. Some checklist here. Oh, actually, I just realized. Next page, please. Oh, actually, that is the last page. Sorry, Vlad, I didn't give you any opportunity to speak.
No problem, Ayaka. No problem at all. Maybe I think you covered most of the things here. So maybe I just want to make like a couple of comments, and if we can move to the previous page, which is page 2. Can you please move to the previous page? Oh, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So just on this one, I just want to draw your attention to A6 and A7. So A6 is about the mitigation impact, and A7 is about the adaptation impact in terms of beneficiaries. So at this stage, you have to provide estimate, even like a high-level estimate of those impacts. So going back to the question that was asked in the previous session, whether we need a log frame. Actually, we don't need a log frame here, but these two indicators, which are part of the GCF log frame for mitigation and adaptation projects, respectively, the values have to be provided here. And if we move to the next page, yeah, when you have the context and baseline, this is also the page where you need to provide some information on the climate rationale. And I'll give the floor to Kevin, maybe to talk a little bit more about this here. And then I'll talk a little bit more about B2 as well. But Kevin, maybe you would like to add now on section B1 and what we expect to see there.
Thank you, Vlad. Yes, and very briefly, just for everyone's information, I really don't think context and baseline is a particularly helpful heading there. And I just wanted to let everybody know that we went through a recent exercise when we were going to update the concept note template. And I think, Vlad, you and I and other colleagues, we did come up with some more helpful text. But at that time, for various reasons, it was not incorporated. I think what I would like to offer is that Vlad, you and I could actually just work directly with anyone who wants to put in a proposal and just tell them in plain English what it is that we would expect to see in section B1. So, you know, for an adaptation proposal, it would be this and that and that, and for a mitigation proposal, it would be your NDCs, your greenhouse gas, your energy mix. And so, you know, I think we can be far more helpful in the guiding text that we give. One day the form will catch up, but in the meantime, I think we can actually just provide that guidance directly.
Thank you, Kevin, for this intervention. And indeed, during the consultation period that we are going to have before the 18th, we'll be happy to provide to all of you who'll be working on concept notes more focused guidance on how to fill in this particular section and what information to include here. And moving on to section B2, if you look at the second paragraph of the guidance here, it also talks about describing the theory of change. So this part looks really at the narrative of the theory of change, but as I said in my presentation, it's also important to have an annex where you also provide a TOC diagram for this project. And as I said before, this is something that will make your lives as project developers and as accredited entities much easier if you have a clear TOC here. And again, similar to the previous section, we'll be happy to provide any further detailed guidance on the concrete proposals when we move on. And my final comment is on section C. As you see here, you need to provide the budget per component and output. So this is basically the place where you have to also link the outputs and the activities that you have in your project and how you want to budget them. And this part eventually is also going to be linked to the TOC that you develop and also later on to the logical framework. So as you can see, like a lot of elements of what we introduced, they already start appearing here in the concept note. And of course, you have to develop them into much more detail when we move further to the funding proposal development. But these are for now the two comments, the comments that I wanted to make. And over to Ayaka, and because I see that we have some more questions in the chat now.
Thank you, Vlad. Okay, we have more questions in the chat now. I see two questions. One from Aquila. Can you show us a TOC template that we need to use? Thanks. Vlad, is there anything available for TOC template?
So what we can do is, we're in this session, I will share in the chat and also with the organizers of the event today, the draft TOC template, and you can receive it by email later or download it from this chat. So we have that template, it's in a it's in a PowerPoint format, and you can use it. And I think the Secretariat also shared the concept note, but let me share the TOC template as well.
Yeah, thank you. Kevin, is that your old hand or is that a new hand?
It's an old hand, my apologies.
Okay, no worries. Okay, in that case, we move to Sitaita's question. Here goes. What are the benefits of using the normal concept note template rather than opting for SAP? Right. Sorry, Sataita, I'm sorry, I think this question is directed for me. Me personally, I have never used SAP, and I may not be familiar with the SAP concept note.
I can talk about SAP if it
Oh,
helps.
thank you, Kevin. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so SAP stands for Simplified Approval Process, and therein lies the clue to the difference. The intention of SAP, and it's presently under revision to make it even simpler, is to make faster and more efficient project decisions and endorsements towards projects. And because of that, then SAP is presently limited in value, as well as in the socioeconomic categories of projects and therefore entities that can use it. So for small projects, if those qualifying criteria are met, then the SAP is intended to facilitate a faster process. But if the project under consideration is larger in financial terms or has anything other than the most minimal environmental and social consequences, then it cannot go through the SAP process. So it's a fast, the intention is that it's a faster process, but is therefore limited in scope and in size.
If I may just do a follow-up question there. I understand that bit, but I've also heard from other GCF people that it's best to do the standard one because you get to learn about governance and other issues like that. I wonder whether you could provide some explanation in terms of the difference between using SAP and if you use the normal or standard one.
I'm afraid I don't know of any. So you may well be right, but my understanding of the SAP process, and the other idea is that it's also designed for scaling up pilot projects. It's almost like an accelerator type approach. Presently limited to 10 million, presently limited to our most minimal environmental and social risk category. And as I say, there are discussions about broadening those scopes. If there are also implications for the subsequent governance, then I'm not aware of them, but Vlad might be.
No, I don't think so. I'm aware of that. But Setaita, let us check internally, and we'll get back to you on that question.
Sure, thanks.
And by the way, I cannot post the TLC in the chat here. So what I'm going to do is I'll share the template with the Secretariat, and they will share it with all of you by email after the end of today's session. I hope that is fine by everyone.
Okay.
And maybe Ayaka, while we are waiting for other questions, I wanted to make like one more comment on my side, which is linked to, of course, the TOC and the log frame development, but actually the Secretariat at the moment is developing video training modules on TOC. That one is going to be ready within a couple of months. And also we'll start developing the training module for logical frameworks, which will be ready towards the second half of the year. So I think with that, you'll be equipped with much stronger tools in developing those elements of funding proposals. So that is probably one thing that I wanted to share with everybody who is participating today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Vlad. Just waiting for other questions to come through in the chat.
And Kevin also put a message in the chat that there will be video trainings from his side around adaptation and mitigation proposals.
Hello. Hi. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello. Good morning. Good morning. Sorry. I'm from Mauritius. I wanted to ask one question, please.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, you see, Mauritius already has benefited from some funding from the GCF. So can we make more leverages for funding? I mean, for future projects, because we have already submitted our new NDC, where we have a much better target. So are we allowed to make more leverage for funding from the GCF?
So you are from Mauritius, and there
Yes.
are approved projects. I see there are, yes, 5 approved projects. And your question is more leverage, meaning more loans. Is your question, are we allowed to make more loans into the project? Have any project not been submitted to GCF already?
I don't have the latest data, but I'm from the electricity department. See, I have to check with ministry. I think Ministry of Finance is a focal point for GCF.
Okay. If this is regarding is this regarding an approved project, or is this something that we are currently considering?
It should be new. I think it should be. We are thinking about new projects.
It's a new project. Yeah, so I think if it's a new project and has not been approved, it has to first undergo the review of our interdivisions. First, we need to see the idea and understand about the project better to see where it fits in our sectoral priority. then I think the usual process is for us to develop the idea from there, a bit based on whether you have an opportunity or not. Yeah, Vlad, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Ayaka. No, I think you covered a large part of the question. I just wanted to add regarding the existing projects. So if, for example, you want to develop a new project that builds upon existing approved projects, it's important to show actually what are the synergies between this project and the existing projects, what is the new part of that, and how that additional financing building upon an existing project was actually helping further address particular climate vulnerability. So that is also an important part, because we want to avoid, for example, overlaps of investment. So you need to demonstrate, in case you want to build an existing example, like what is the new element of that newly proposed idea.
Yes, I got your point. I will discuss with my colleagues at the ministry, and hopefully we'll try to discuss further, and maybe we can submit new proposals if there are anything interesting.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you, Sanjay.
Welcome, Madam.
Okay, are there any other questions? Oh, sorry, just Sanjay, just one question from my side as a follow-up. Has that project been discussed already with the NDA?
Unfortunately, my colleague who was from the ministry, he was attending this meeting this morning. He has to leave on an urgent basis. So I think tomorrow we can have a discussion on that.
Okay, I think it's always good to have it discussed with the NDA first ahead of the project coming to the GCF. Okay, thank you. I see Aquila, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. We just want a clarification around what we need to work on and submit on the 18th. Whether it's just the theory of change and the 2-page project idea, or the theory of change and we need to populate the concept note template that you have shared with us. Thank you.
So maybe I can take that question. What we would like you to work on is developing a draft concept note based on the template that you see in front of you, and of course a theory of change that is attached to it. I mean, that will be the expectation on our side. Now, given the fact that you don't have like that much time, you have only basically 2 weeks to complete that. Our suggestion is to work on concepts that maybe you have discussed with the GCF Secretariat already, or concepts that are included either in the entity work program or the country program, or something that is more or less in slightly more advanced stage, and they take on board the inputs that we have provided and revise it accordingly. That may be easier, but of course, if you want, you can also work on completely new ideas. We do not limit you on that. And the other point that I wanted to make again is that we'll be available between today and the 18th to provide feedback on the draft. We'll share the communication channel with the Secretariat of the event, and based on that, we can set up a meeting with you or send you comments by email to help you further improve the concept note before you make the presentation. So I hope that that is helpful. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Vlad. I note that we are a little bit over time now, so and I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I think we are ready to close this session. I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ayaka-san and Brad. and also the Kevin for your presentation, and also that all the participants for their hard work and commitment. Thank you very much. Tomorrow will be the third day of the workshop, and like today, the start time will be 7 a.m. of Gulf Standard Time from noon Japan time, and then 3 p.m. Fiji time. So thank you very much for your active participation, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.